you.
Thank you, Alfred. Distinguished speakers and panelists, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. A warm welcome to you on behalf of our Acting Group CEO, Beatrice Ajimayabi, and the entire leadership at Media General. A few months ago, TV3 carried a story about an old lady in the Volta region. She had lost all her life savings by applying an old method of savings she had learned from her own mother many years ago. She had buried every cent she had saved over the years in a hole in her backyard. On the day the story broke, she dug up to take some of her savings to buy a few things. To her horror, termites had destroyed 90% of what she had saved, and she was inconsolable. Asked why she didn't save her money at the bank, she responded by saying she did not have trust in the system because some Susu collectors had swindled her. Her story may seem very remote to many of us in this room this morning, but the reality of some Ghanaians across the country. On August 12, 1920, Charles Ponzi, a swindler who paid out returns from investments from other investors' money, was arrested and charged with 86 counts of fraud. He spent 14 years in prison for his crimes and died years later. But Charles Ponzi left an infamous scheme named after him that has transcended time and continues to scheme thousands out of their hard-earned funds globally. Over the past few years, we have experienced increased activity and discourse on Ponzi schemes and their derivatives impacting many Ghanaians, with the resultant effect being a gradual erosion of trust in our financial services sector. Today's conversation is a maiden Media General Economic Dialogue series. We shall today examine Ponzi schemes and their impact on the victims and try to find out whether Ghana has learned any lessons and what the way forward should be. To discuss this important subject, we have here resource persons who understand the issue and who we believe have the power to help effect change. These are truly distinguished speakers. We have today private legal practitioner Asa Nkuma, who is here, Vice President of Imani Africa Kofi Bento, and Deputy Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission Paula Babio, representing the Director General himself. Of course, we also have Mr. Hassan Andani, who is President of the Ghana Association of Bankers. Please join me to acknowledge these very distinguished personalities here. And I think you also deserve a round of applause, because without you, there's no forum. Thank you for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, at Media General, we are committed to focusing on issues that have real impact on the lives of our audience, and we are excited about today's conversation. It is our hope that our audience and the general public will find this session instructive as we collectively work towards restoring confidence in Ghana's financial sector and protecting depositors and investors. On behalf of everyone at Media General, I welcome you to this forum and look forward to truly fruitful outcomes. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abraham Osari, who is the General Manager News here at Media General. Thank you. You know, for those who want to go on the tangent of arguing that those who fall victim to Ponzi schemes as a result of greed, you may be right. But the focus for this morning really is on information, giving out information to arm the many who will be watching, listening, to take the right decisions when it comes to investment. To say information is the currency of our time. We're going to be introducing a few people who have joined us. Obviously, we appreciate everybody who is here, and we thank you for making the time to be here. And for those of you who are also listening to us on radio on 3FM 92.7, who are on your way here, you can obviously join us. We're also live on Onia 95.1 FM. We're live on Connect 97.1 FM, as well in Takoradi and beyond. You can watch us on TV3. We're live on TV3 Ghana on Facebook. And for those of you who can also join us all across the world, is 3news.com. We have been joined here by the Acting Group CEO of Media General, the host of this first economic dialogue series. Madam Beatrice Abe Ajiman, please. Thank you very much. I was hoping you were going to stand and just give us a wave. We want to see you. Thank you very much. Thank you. We also have here Mr. John Ewa, who is the CEO of UMB. Mr. Ewa. Thank you very much. We have Mr. Emmanuel Esiedu Mante, who's a former Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana. Thank you, sir. We also have here Mr. Okone Koijani. He is yet to join us from what I hear. He's caught up in traffic. Mr. Chinebo Akodia Boachi, Executive Secretary, Ghana Association of Savings and Loans Companies. Dr. Richmond Etiahene is a banking consultant, also here as well. Thank you. Senior Hossi, CEO, Bulk Oil Storage and Transportation, BOST. Chamber of, I beg your pardon, the Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors. Sorry. Yes. It's the Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributor. Hassan, I beg your pardon, Senior Hossi, thank you very much for that. We also have Al Hassan and Danny, who is going to be one of our speakers as well here, together with all the speakers who have joined us. And we also will be joined by a few others who are on their way from the indication that we're getting. We're going to move on now to the program and have our first speaker introduced, and all the speakers will take their seats here, and then they would begin the presentation. Mr. Paul Abebio is Deputy Director General of the Securities and Exchanges Commission, SEC. Mr. Abebio, please put your hands together for him as he takes his seat as our first speaker. Thank you very much. We also have Al Hassan Andani, President, Ghana Association of Bankers, and Managing Director of Stanbic Bank, Ghana Limited. Please, round of applause for him. Thank you very much. We also have a man who is quoted as saying that he turned down a request to become a judge because of his unwillingness to deprive himself of good life. He is a managing partner at law firm Benti H.L. Lecha and Ankoma. Ladies and gentlemen, Ace Ankoma, thank you. The next and final speaker is a senior consultant, Bento Consulting Limited, Senior Vice President, Imani Africa. He has a wealth of experience in business strategy and financial services marketing. Ladies and gentlemen, Kofi Bento, a round of applause for him. Thank you very much. These are the four speakers that we have put together, well sought after, to speak on this all-important theme. Investments in the face of Ponzi schemes. How do we clean the mess? Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for them again. Thank you. First to speak, I want to hear from the regulator in this space, talking about the Securities and Exchanges Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together as we welcome Mr. Paul Abebio. Thank you.
I guess good morning. Good morning to you. And good morning to my fellow panelists on this interesting topic. I understand this is really a panel discussion and it's a conversation we're going to have. And I think I'll make a few remarks just to lay the foundation. But again, greetings to your cherished listeners, to the distinguished people of Ghana who are watching us today. It's interesting because the Securities and Exchange Commission, actually 20 years this year, we were set up in 1998. Prior to that, we were actually a department of the Bank of Ghana. This means that those that we regulate have actually been around longer than we have. And so it's clear that there was a need, there was already a market. People were already in business. Companies were being formed. Capital was being created. People were raising money from friends and family to take part in various projects. Businesses were finding ways, either borrowing, issuing private notes. So there were transactions happening. And so the question comes up as to why do you need a regulator? Why do you put in place a framework when the market seems to be working? But as you will all be aware of, markets are not as efficient as we would expect them to be. Sometimes some people have more information than others. And that information is something we call asymmetry. So, for instance, you're going to buy a car. And let me come down to the basics. You're going to buy a car. The car's engine is 15 years old, but the body of the car is 5 years old. The seller of the car knows what is in the car. You, the buyer, don't have a good idea of, one, how old is the car's engine? Will it last you as long? And because you're not a technician or an engineer, unless you bring an independent person to verify, you might buy a product that is not fit for purpose. So in the same way, in financial markets, products come up. Businesses put forward proposals to raise capital. And the question becomes, are they giving the right level of information to the participants? Is there a transparent mechanism for determining the value of an instrument? And then in any opportunity or any investment opportunity that arises, there are risks. So are people aware of the risks embedded in that opportunity? The issue of Ponzi schemes, I think the speaker gave some remarks about it, so I won't belabor the point. But the typical framework is that people create a scheme where the early investors, so you get in first, the next 2 people come in, another 4 people come in. The first person who got in is paid with the money from the last people who came in. And the scheme continues like that. Oftentimes, the question becomes, what is the underlying business, right? The case of Ponzi, and I think there are a few other examples. His was the most popular one. But in his case, he was saying that there are these postage stamps that you can buy and bring to the US and sell for astronomical profits. So the first time around, he bought those postage stamps. He sold it. But in reality, those kinds of profits are not realizable, right? But the next people who brought in money, he used to pay the first people, then the subsequent people, and because he was paying people, it kept seeming like the scheme was sustainable. So in terms of the definition, it's a broad framework. And the question becomes, what are the general outlines of it? And I'll mention a few so that my other panelists can take the stage. How many minutes do I have? Wow, that's a long time. Okay. So some of the general characteristics are that they seem to offer very high levels of return with little to no risk. So again, the question becomes, if there's a certain framework that offers exceptional returns, are there any risks within that framework? And it's important for the public to understand the risks involved in any business. There's a general rule of thumb we use in finance that with greater returns comes the possibility of risk. And risk is not necessarily that it will guarantee failure. Risk just means the possibility of failure, right? So when we talk about risk and you don't understand the risk in a project, and I know there are areas, I don't want to mention particular industries, but some industries in Ghana are viewed as risky. But the question we ask is, what is the risk in that industry? What is the possibility of failure? And how much do you stand to lose if there's a failure, right? And a good example is, let's say, buying land. People say that it's a sure banker. When you buy land, you always win. But if you buy land in a flood-prone area, there's a risk of the land being flooded. And the risk that the house you put up there may not be of the value that you think it should be. So even though the land is still there, you haven't actually lost the land. You have your title. But the value you expected from that investment has been diminished. So most investments actually carry risk. What we call risk-free, which is Government of Ghana Treasury bills, have some risk in there. Because government will always be able to print money to pay its debt. But if the cedi depreciates, or I'll give a more practical example. Supposing you bought a treasury bill 3 years ago, around 25%. Now rates are 19%. Your calculation of your internal rate of return was supposed to be 25% per annum, because when you get your dividends, you reinvest it. But when rates fall to say 19%, when you reinvest, you are reinvesting at 19%, not at the 25% it was 3 years ago. So technically, even where there is very limited possibility of risk, there's still volatility. And the good case is the example of the US markets, where rates are now rising. So to say an investment is riskless is really a question of, are you being misinformed? And it's important to understand that. The other point is consistent returns, overly consistent returns. We are all in this market. We know how Ghana's economy can move around. So in general, if there's an investment opportunity where consistently there are going to be high returns, it's important to question what is going on here and why or how are they able to generate such returns. That is a red flag to be suspicious of. And oftentimes, Ponzi schemes are also not registered. So I mentioned the history of the regulator and how it came to be. Because in registration, a company is required to provide certain basic information. They are required to file their returns with us. They are required to also give information. Their annual reports are supposed to be in their offices. So if you go into an investment firm and they don't tell you their registration details, they don't tell you who their directors are, and then you can't see any financial returns that they have filed, that's something to be aware of. And then oftentimes, their strategies are complex. You cannot understand it. And an emerging area is the issue of Bitcoin. Now, there is cryptocurrency as it is now, which is, should we say, some form, people say a store of value. Right? You put $100 in there, and it converts into a certain number of Bitcoins. But a framework now has come that somehow people are trading Bitcoin at a level that's generating a certain kind of return consistently. The question becomes, what strategy are they doing? Some of the popular names people would use are structured hedging or future sales. What is a future sale? What is a structured hedge? And if you are hedging, it means you are protecting against certain risks. What is the risk in there? And what does it mean? Oftentimes, when you ask the employees and ask these questions, sometimes you may think you are missing something. When you have that doubt, ask that question. Ask that question. Because again, as I mentioned, with the regulators, we're actually a new phenomenon. The market has always been there. The products are similar. It's about capital, it's about savings, it's about mobilizing funds to do certain projects. So what are those projects? And what is the result of it? How are they trading it? What platforms is it being traded on? And what records do they give to investors? Another element, which is an interesting point that the SEC in the US made, is that oftentimes these firms have issues with paperwork. When you ask them for their contracts and you look at it, sometimes I encourage people to talk to your lawyer, because even on the face of the contract, you can see that this is something that will not succeed. And sometimes they won't even give you any paperwork. They try and just talk to you. And they try and say everything is very simple. You put in this much, you get that much. That's all you need to know. So it's important to be mindful of the paperwork that goes into it and to demand a copy for yourself. Then the last leg is the sustainability of it, right? Oftentimes when they have challenges, then they promise a very high rate of return. So normally if the rate of return is 5%, at a point where they have difficulties, they come out and they're offering, say, 15% or 10%. Now, at that point, they will ask all the investors to roll over. When people ask for withdrawals, they ask for rollovers. So that also indicates that there's a challenge in their ability to meet their requirements. So those are, I would say, some broad parameters around the nature of it. I'll speak briefly about what we do, just so that the market understands the role of SEC. So the SEC's role is actually to promote a fair and efficient capital markets, and also to ensure that investors' interests are protected. Now, this is not to say that we'll collect your money for you if there's a default. We ensure that market operators give the right information they're supposed to give, that when there are disputes or there are issues of misdemeanor, we seek to address that. We are in the early stages of looking at an investor protection fund, but that would cater for, should we say, investors in unit trusts or collective regulated schemes. And that's why we say if you're in an unregulated scheme, you are out there dealing on your own. It's like giving money to your friend. Whatever happens is between you and your friend. You can go to court, but beyond that, in terms of technical arbitration or resolution processes, it is what the court is able to determine as your fair due, and that also has its risks. So some of the entities regulate are fund managers, broker-dealers, mutual funds, unit trusts, custodians, primary dealers, the securities exchange. So if you talk about the stock market, we regulate the stock exchange itself. Sure. Okay. Trustees, private equity firms, and some of the primary dealers, those who deal in government securities. There are about 278 entities that we regulate. This does not include 36 listed companies. So the listed companies also file their returns on this exchange and with us as well. And then there are 4 on the alternative exchange. So in total, we're looking at about 318 entities. So that's a framework of what we do. We monitor these entities. We do inspections. When people have issues, they complain to us. So we have an email, info@sec.gov.gh. So if you have any complaints or you have any insights you can share with us, you can send us an email. Our website is sec.gov.gh. So on that note, I'll hand over the mic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please, round of applause again for Mr. Paul Abebio. We're going to go straight to the legal argument, and lawyer Ace Ankoma is next to speak on that. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for him.
Thank you very much. Often when I'm invited, I ask myself, do these people really want to hear me? Because when I listen to myself, I won't invite myself to speak. I'll speak on the Ponzi scheme and the law in Ghana. But I'll give you my definition of a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme is when fraud is milking greed. When fraud is milking greed. We got a definition. The most common is investment fraud. So you are promised impressively large and regular payments, but the funds have no underlying credible investment scheme. It is simply the money from the funds being gathered, which is being circulated among everybody. So they've collected 100 million cedis. If it's time for your dividend, interest, value, you go and collect it. But it's from the same pool. There's no further flow into the Dead Sea. And so that money is going to run out. But the other critical thing is that, and of course it's named after the US swindler Charles Ponzi, who did this postage stamp scheme in 1919 to 1920. But it actually predated him. But he got his name placed on it. The largest of this has been the case of Bernard Madoff, the disgraced New York broker who was sentenced to 150 years in prison in 2009 and died later. You must distinguish this from a pyramid scheme. With a pyramid, a few people start, and the people who start are asked to recruit more people, so they benefit from the people they recruit. The people down the pyramid do not get anything because by that time the money has run out. But what are these monies really used for? When the law finally catches up with pyramid and Ponzi schemes, they evolve. And so now one of the most interesting evolutions of Ponzi schemes is what is called commodity fraud, where you are told that there's a certain commodity that we are investing in. The world has been duping you. This commodity will give you large returns. The most prominent was a Peruvian guy called Pedro Jaramillo. I'm sure they might pronounce Jaramillo, who was also called Enrique, who was jailed for 12 years in just September 2017. The judge who jailed him said his conduct was, quote, was as, quote, calculated and utterly despicable, unquote, and noted the, quote, profoundly devastating impact, unquote, of his scheme on his victims. How did he pull it off? He said he had an investment scheme which produces great results. He created a lot of falsehoods. What did he do to attract people? He rented an office on Wall Street. And he shot a video on YouTube. Yeah, it's the same thing. You see, that's the Bible says, there's nothing new under the sun. And a good video said that he had a certain global investment bank. The video had a soundtrack from Frank Sinatra, New York, New York. It featured images of Wall Street, the stock exchange. But he didn't create any individual investment accounts. There were no records. He didn't make any investments. He diverted the majority of the funds to his own use. He had lavish vacations for himself, friends, and family, and to pay the earlier people. It is different from an investment bubble. And a lot of this is from history. One of the most interesting investment bubbles formed the foundation of company law. By the 17th century, there was the evolution of companies in England. And the stock market had been established. By the 18th century, there was a boom in company business. Everybody believed that if you bought shares, you would make money. In fact, one company said that bring your money. What venture? He says that the venture includes, one quote, for an undertaking which shall in due time be reviewed, unquote. And people sent their money there. What is a business? They said, quote, for an undertaking which shall in due time be reviewed, unquote. And people still sent their money there. And so basically, people were just throwing their money at companies who had nothing to show. And so people then started buying companies, whether or not the company they bought is relevant to their business. And so a banking business bought a company which was formed to manufacture sword blades. And so the bank issued sword blade notes and sword blade bonds. And so in 1711, a company which was formed to deal in slave trade, and it was called the Company of Merchants of Great Britain Trading to the South Sea, and otherwise known as the South Sea Company. It went to the government of England and bought an irredeemable portion of the national debt. So it actually paid the government and then owned the debt. And then started distributing this to people. And projecting that within months, shares would jump from £100 to £1,000 per share. Of course, money flowed to the South Sea Company. But once South Sea became such a big thing, it got competition. And so it wasn't getting the expected returns. But South Sea was very connected. So it got the government to pass an act to stop its competitors. That act became known as the South Sea Act. But once the regulation began, competition died, South Sea suffered, the shares never rose beyond £124. So the South Sea Act might not have succeeded, but it marked an important cornerstone in the evolution of company law, which applies in Ghana. The South Sea Act provided that you cannot raise money unless you have what they call a charter, something we will now call a prospectus. That principle remains in our company law till today. Ladies and gentlemen, before you put your money in any business, you should ask questions. There's a common qualification of money in Ghana. It is called hard-earned. It is presumed that every money you earn, you must have worked very hard and toiled for it. Before you invest your money, ask questions. Many of these Ponzi schemes are incorporated as companies. So I'll start with company law. Section 9 of the Companies Act says that a private company should have in its regulations a clause that says that it is prohibited from acquiring shares, from inviting the public to acquire its shares, or to deposit money, whether for fixed periods, interest or not. So when you go to the company, don't be impressed by the certificate of incorporation and the certificate to commence business that are on the walls. Can you ask for their regulations? Ask for their regulations. If they don't give it to you, go to the company's registry. If you are going to invest 500,000, spend 5 cedis to go to the company's registry. Ask for the regulations of the company. Once it's a private company, please go to Regulation 8C. Regulation 8C of any private company. These are the words you will find. Quote. Quote, the company is a private company and is accordingly, C, the company is prohibited from making any invitation to the public to deposit money. I have checked. Every Ponzi scheme has been incorporated as a private company, and their Regulation 8C says that the company is prohibited from taking deposits. Remember the regulation number? 8C. 8C. Always look for it. So if a company undertakes this venture without going through the prospectus process, it is a breach of the law, and the law says that all the persons who invited people to bring their money and officers of the company, which include employees, may go to jail. The resulting transaction can be rescinded by the other party, and third parties are entitled to compensation. But it is more. Under Section 219, the Registrar General, when he or she determines that the business of the company is being organized for an otherwise fraudulent or unlawful purpose, can commence investigations. When the Registrar General has enough basis that the company is being used for an illegality, for example, collecting deposits when it's not licensed to do so, the Registrar General will go to court, and the court will appoint an inspector who will take over the books and do a full investigation and present a report to the court. When the report is presented to the court, then the Attorney General will be invited in to prosecute for crimes. The Registrar General can wind the company up, and proceedings, this is law. Look at Section 225 of the Companies Act. Proceedings ought, in the public interest, be brought by the company against the directors, even former directors, against persons to recover property, damages, or compensation to which the company is entitled, and the registrar may bring the action even in the name of the company. So basically, the Registrar General has the power when you are using the company for an unlawful purpose, such as using it to raise deposits when you are not licensed to raise deposits. The Registrar General can stop the business and work with the Attorney General to send you to jail. And that jail term includes employees. And so the Companies Act, which regulates the operation of all companies in Ghana, shows clearly that there's law, but who will enforce it? My conclusion is that Ghana doesn't need any new laws. Every law required to regulate us and even protect us from ourselves and our own greed and fraud exists. But you only hear of them when these things happen, and then we go to sleep. But it doesn't mean a private company cannot take deposits at all. No. You can only take the deposits if you are licensed to take deposits. That's where Bank of Ghana comes in. So there's what they now call the Banks and Specialized Deposit Taking Institutions Act. This is 2016, this is new, but we've always had Banking Act, Act 930. It says, a person shall not accept a deposit from the general public or carry on a deposit-taking business in or from within the country without a license. So I can't just set up my table and say, bring money. I will give it back to you after. No, you need a license. It's under this act that savings and loans companies are licensed, banks are licensed, microfinance institutions are licensed. This is the law that licenses all of them. So you can't take deposits however you disguise it without a license. The law defines deposit, it defines deposit taking, it is comprehensive. And then it makes it an offense to take deposits without a license. So if you take deposits without a license, the company itself could be fined, directors could be fined and go to jail between 2 and 4 years, And if it's an individual who did it, you could go to jail between 2 and 4 years. The law exists to stop Ponzi schemes. We have had several Ponzi schemes in this country. May I ask a question? Has anybody ever gone to jail? I don't know. Well, someone says no. I don't know. But these laws have existed before the Ponzi schemes. So you should leave here asking your governments why they have never enforced these laws. The sweetness of the pudding is in the eating of it. Let's poke the eye of the cadaver. There are maggots hiding there. It is even an offense to call your business a bank without a banking license. However it is spelled. Without a license. Now let's get to the Securities Industry Act. And thanks, Paul. You've done a fantastic job. The SEC is empowered to control the entire securities industry. It includes licensing all operators. 2 come to mind: broker-dealers and investment advisors. You cannot be a broker-dealer or investment advisor without an SEC license. So you say, as for me, I'm not taking deposits. I am taking commodities. You are involved in a brokerage. You are a dealer. You need a license. So the law has outthought us all. All the Ponzi schemes, the law has outthought them. But I wish I had answers. You cannot engage in dealing in securities in any shape, manner, or form without a license. The word securities is defined to include commodities futures, which means we are holding your asset and we are paying you money in future. It's a securities transaction, whether it is cocoa, kinky, or tilapia, or aluminium. You cannot say, I have this aluminium, I'm going to trade it and pay you money. It's a commodities futures. It's a securities transaction. You need a license to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, it also defines it to include derivatives. And what are derivatives? It's a financial instrument. So you got a piece of paper, it's an instrument, whose characteristics, this is the law, and value, characteristics and value are dependent on or derived from one or more underlying assets. So it's different from you bought a house. No. If you have a group of houses and you are trading with them, that they are underlying assets, and it's a securities transaction. It's a derivative. And it says that so underlying assets such as a commodity, metals, bond, equity, currency. It's a derivative. You can't do it without a license. And Paul is right. The license is because they want to see exactly what are you doing. How are you able to sustain this? Because if you have indeed found a scheme that can pay 200% a year, and the government itself is paying 19%, it is revolutionary. We should make you president. We should take Ghana's entire budget and give it to you to manage. We must sack the finance minister. And so let SEC know. So we move it from the corner that you are hiding into a national property. So let SEC regulate it. But if you are unwilling, unprepared to be regulated, then the law says you can't do it here. Go and do it anywhere else you want to do it. Not within the 4 walls of Ghana. So it's an offense. SEC can impose a penalty if you do it. They have the power to shut you down and require your books. And if they shut you down and you go back to operating, they have the power you will go to jail. So when they beat their chest and say nobody can stop us, when they are stopped, they stop. Because there's jail time. There's jail time. It is a fearful thing to fall in the hands of the law. Remember that. Let me go on to some of the commodities frauds. So they say a metal. We are licensed by Minerals Commission. We have law, the Minerals and Mining Act, which says the Minerals Commission must license any dealing in any metal, any mineral in this country. The license will contain terms and conditions. If you operate without the license or outside your terms and conditions, it's an offense. The company directors will go to jail. So if somebody says, I'm trading in a metal, ask, can I see your Minerals Commission license? When you see it, go to clauses 1 or 2. Often the term is to buy gold from small-scale dealers in Ghana and export same. Standard. Buy gold and export. So you can't buy gold and sell in Ghana, except you have a special license. So if your license is to buy gold and sell, how are you buying gold locally? Ghanaians, let's ask questions. And in any event, small-scale mining has been banned for a year. For the last 1 year, small-scale gold mining has been banned. So what have you been buying? You see how obvious this is? That's why I say a Ponzi scheme is where fraud is milking greed. Where fraud is milking greed. I've done with that one. Let me just add this. When all of these happen, so we've seen that the Companies Act can work. We've seen that Securities Industry Act can work. We've seen that the Minerals and Mining Law can work. Our criminal laws can work. Because the underlying scheme is fraudulent. If it's fraudulent, Section 132 of our Criminal Offences Act talks of defrauding by false pretenses, where a person, by means of a false pretense, obtains the consent of another to part or transfer with ownership of a thing. So the money that you were tricked will give you 600% a year. You have actually been defrauded by false pretenses. If the law worked, the person who defrauded you should be making a beeline to jail. If you play Monopoly, you understand, go straight to jail. If you pass go, don't take 200. In another aspect, it could be stealing. Because stealing is simply dishonestly appropriating a thing that is not yours. If the law worked, people will be making a beeline for jail. People who work together for a common purpose to commit crime, so the people who sat down and cooked up Ponzi schemes are guilty of the offense of conspiracy. They ought to be punished for the same level as the substantive crime. Those who helped and facilitated and encouraged it, your offense is called abetment. So today we are sharing it. Those who encouraged and facilitated it, your offense is called abetment. When you dishonestly appropriate a thing which has been vested in you under a trust. So I gave you my money under a trust scheme and you have spent it because it's now time to pay and you can't pay. The offense is called fraudulent breach of trust. We are here, 1-1. Then there's racketeering, where there's a structured group which is defined to include companies. Operates an unlawful activity involving fraud, deceit, etc. That is also an offense. So if the law was working, this should happen. Let me end. In Julius Caesar, Cassius said to Brutus, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. I say the fault, dear Ghana, is not in our stars, it's not in fate, it's not in a curse, or even any spiritual force. It is in ourselves that we are unwilling, unable, and unprepared to enforce our laws. That is why we are where we are. If the first person who started this had gone to jail, at least they will be more careful. It won't be that brazen. It is not as if the law to protect us from our greed doesn't exist. We have simply and repeatedly refused, failed, or neglected to implement the law. And that is the summary of the tragedy we call Ghana. So for now, just take this from me. A Ponzi scheme is where fraud milks greed. If the investment sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. Ask questions, read. Go to company's registry and file a simple search on the company. Read the regulations. Look for regulation 8C. 8C. Let me end quickly. But sometimes, if you play with the law will burn you. That is when you realize that it is only when you have an open wound that you realize that the otherwise tame housefly is neither your friend nor harmless. Thank you.
Well, So the regulation is what? 8C. That's what we're living with. Is what? 8C. 8C. See, the law, as he said, has outthought the Ponzi schemes. But I think that the issue with implementation cuts across every sector of this country, isn't it? We have laws to check even how people sneeze, and sneeze well. But still, the problem is there. You know, we have a lot of mosquitoes as well. Yes. To control the breeding of mosquitoes. But the mosquitoes are biting us still. It's a problem. You see, so let me, at this point, let me just say that we're supposed to have a presentation from the Bank of Ghana. We received a message, in fact, it was a WhatsApp message this morning, that circumstances beyond their control, they are not able to make it. You know, I thought the language was limited to we broadcasters. You know, when you have a breaking transmission, you can't come back again. Then you apologize to your viewers. But circumstances beyond their control, they couldn't be here, unfortunately. But we will still chase them. After this, we would put together a concept paper of a sort and present it to them some way, somehow, so they know what happened here. Then they get to know. So thank you very much. We're live as well on 3FM 92.7. We're live on Onuya 95.1. We're live on Connect 97.1 in Takrady and beyond. We're live as well on TV3 Ghana on Facebook. We're having a global audience now. Let me just encourage those of you who are watching us all across the world. You're not left out. Whatever concerns and questions you're putting on our various social media platforms, we're moving forward, and we will definitely ask the speakers who are here so that you can also be very well served. It's a global conversation we're having in this economic dialogue series here at the Executive Theatre TV3, if you're watching as well on television. We're going to our next speaker, and he's going to also continue on that same tangent, but still exposing a lot more to us. He is a senior vice president at policy think tank Imani Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Kofi Bento.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm happy others have come before me and done the hard work. So we'll just share a few thoughts. I wanted to start with something that has already just been said. The laws are there, but you wonder what's going on. And hopefully I'd like to take it from a general or a policy point of view. Why should it matter to you? And I'd like to start this way. So when it comes to law, not even lawyers read it. You get to grips with the law when you cross a certain line and you realize there's a law against it. So inherently, there is that issue with law. Then we have a particularly difficult situation in our own environment. 80% of our people are either stark illiterate or semi-literate. Semi-literate. They read, they won't understand. And there is a particular brand of ignorance in Ghana, which is what I call switching off your brain. I see it many times. People know, they don't like what their knowledge will tell them, so they switch off their brain. And Ponzi fits in that scheme. Greed is one thing. I can excuse you a bit for ignorance. You didn't know. And I mention this because many of you still, today, right now, are involved in things you don't know. You are taking medicines you don't know about. You should know. You should know. Because you can read. But you have a certain headache and your friend said, I took this and it worked, so he gives it to you, take it. You don't read the package. You buy medicine in Trotro and you take it. You are educated. You drink herbal concoctions. I don't have a problem against them. But there's one active ingredient and then 3,000 others that are killing you. But there are many of us who make an argument strenuously against even testing and certifying and regulating herbal medicines. That's what I call switching off your brain. Because if you start thinking hard enough, you will not do it. Now that I can't excuse you from. So what's the issue here? We do have the laws, but in our environment, we have economic pressures and real ignorance, which are a real danger. So if you look at the history of the Ponzi schemes, you see some of these things play out. Economic pressure and real ignorance. And then there are those who wear suits. There are bankers that took money to Piram and R5 and others that we know of. So those were those who have switched off their brain. I wanted to make this point at the last, but I'll make it here. Government has no responsibility, legal or moral, to pay citizens for losses incurred as a result of engaging in illegal activity. Government has no responsibility, legal or moral, to pay citizens for losses incurred as a result of engaging in illegal activity. Over the period, we've tended to raise this emotional notion based on nothing, that if you end up in a DKM or some sort of situation, government should come to your aid. There is no such responsibility. And the politicians have partly fanned that flame. And in certain situations, I'm aware certain people were paid some money, I don't know where from. And one of these days, somebody should sue them for wasting our money. But why is that important? It's because you need to know. You need to know that you really don't have any protection. Which is why Ace is saying, read this, read that, read this. Started by saying most of us won't read, then there's a head mentality, then there's a switching off of your brain, apart from those who are ignorant, etc. So what is the issue? About 2 years ago, maybe more, some of us actually started observing a certain situation in the system, in our financial system. And we wrote about it. Now, at Imani, we tried to say we would focus on things that become a public policy issue, when it's going to be so pervasive that you need to maybe say something about it. And at the time, we decided this was not yet a public policy issue. It was a personal decision based on what people believe, they want to do. And there are enough laws to deal with it. So the regulations and the laws and other things should work. But we wrote on it. We put them on Facebook and we discussed them at length, and people responded. People said things. Indeed, that was more or less the start of the discussion, that has led to some of these things here. And some of us some people also told us to go away. We were trying to create problems where there was none. And that some of us were involved in banks, and because the money is leaving the banks, we want to come and people will say all kinds of things. But you see, that was to give you personal information to arm yourself. Ultimately, we've gotten here. Our worry is that from when those realizations started till now, we have moved from what essentially should have been a personal problem, and it's become now a public policy problem. And so we've had to make some releases on it. That is what regulators are there for. And my view on this issue is that regulation loses a lot of its essence if it is not preemptive. And that is what I want to say, and I'm looking at you because I know where you're from. And you see, our regulators are restrained. They have to be, because they work on a legal principle called quo warranto. Where is your authority to stop me? So they tend to have a minimalistic interpretation of their powers. And they don't want to be too harsh on people and maybe cause problems on internet, etc. But I think in many of these cases, they were too restrained. Because there's a cheap proverb that says, we need to akete. We say agrobeni. It was clear what it was. And if you read the books, you can tell this is where this is going. So I think they should have been preemptive, because we live in an environment where people are greedy and ignorant, and then some of them to switch off their brains. Now, if they lost personally, I wouldn't have a problem. And then we will not have a public policy issue. But when it comes to financial services and a number of things, there is systemic effect. There is collateral economic effect, to the point where nations collapse. You have
very serious situations and they are widespread. Because of that, it is necessary to err sometimes on the side of caution in some of these situations, which is where I stand on this, because if this will be useful, then we should rejig our system such that these things can be prevented in future, because we will still have people who are ignorant and who have such pressure that they won't check what they need to check. And I humbly submit that that is why regulators are there, to save us from ourselves, even if we are greedy. What you need to know is that nobody can make a law to stop you. I'm trying to not use the words that I tried to use a thesaurus to find nicer words, but I wasn't finding. Let me put it this way. The right to pursue happiness, the right of association and whatever, is also a right to make bad decisions. The right to pursue happiness is also a right to make bad decisions. But if you make a bad decision that's limited to you, then you are fine. If you decide to walk naked in your house, that's not a problem. You don't affect anybody. But if you decide to take it on the street, you'll be breaking the laws of decency. Okay. To that effect, therefore, we should always be minded that if something goes beyond a certain line, no matter what it looks like they say, looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, we will decide that it is a duck. Then you would have to come and convince us that it is not a duck. Now, if we had applied this rule to some of the situations that we found now, then we would have flipped this coin and stopped the bleeding at a certain point. So I'm saying if we are going to go forward, we should agree as a country that our regulators must be a little more proactive when they see a few signs, and then make those people confirm that they have a license to collect deposits, no matter how it's defined. And if it is well and good and nobody's breaking any law, you let them go ahead. But if it is not, cut the bleeding. Because you see, some innocent people, and I don't care too much about the people who switch off their brains, but some innocent people really get hurt. There are suicides you will not hear of. There are other issues that you not hear of. Then the saddest part is where you have the collateral economic effect, the systemic effect, what they call the too big to fail, the domino effect on other places, other areas, other people, other systems. Innocent. So I think that discussing the issue of Ponzi schemes really should be a discussion of prevention. We've gone through not less than 10. We are doing something wrong. So, as a public policy issue, my question is, what do we need to change? I fight against all forms of oppression. So yes, I'm all for the rights of people to do what they have to do, etc. But I stand here to say, when it looks like the Adowa dance, it is Adowa. Ask the person to come and explain to you if they say it is not. Because that is what you are here for. You are here as regulators to protect all of us who, for no reason or for no fault of ours, will not read the law, or even if we read it, will not understand it. So the regulation 8C is there. But I bet you, even from here, most of us won't read it. And most people make their decisions not on what they themselves find, but on the recommendations from a trusted person. So all these things put together, I want to submit that we should all read the law, arm ourselves, but we should also be able to hold a certain level of trust and confidence that even if we have not read the law and armed ourselves, our regulators, whose job it is to do so, will save us from these situations. Because Ace is right. It is greed and fraud taking advantage of it. I worry also about those who are not just greedy, but ignorant. And then there's somebody fraudulent taking advantage of them. There's a saying that there's a sucker born every minute. There will always be situations where there will be people who are vulnerable within the system, even in advanced systems, who will fall to these fraudulent people. And they change. Piram and R5, they said they were dealing in rice. I said, what rice was it? Somebody said postage stamps. Now people are dealing in
metals. So they will change with time. And when you say you can't take a deposit, they will go round it some other way and say we are not taking a deposit. So there would always be sophistications around this thing which will beat even people who are a bit more alert than the ordinary people. But we should never forget, most of our people are not well organized to be able to detect these things. So if you look at the central theme of what I am, pushing, I'm saying that we all should be vigilant. But I think the solution to this public policy problem, solution to this law enforcement problem, the way to prevent this thing from occurring again, largely rests on regulators becoming more alert. In other jurisdictions, when they realized their regulations had loopholes or people had gotten smarter, they came up with new arrangements, Sarbanes-Oxley. Okay? My own view is that Sarbanes-Oxley doesn't apply here much, except you are in an international bank. But the point is that it came because of somebody's experience, and then they created a situation to deal with that experience. We should not just be copying everything from everywhere. Let us develop our own Sarbanes-Oxley, knowing that 80% of our people are stark illiterate or semi-literate, and ask ourselves, how do we empower Bank of Ghana, SEC, and all those other people to protect those? As for you and me who wear tie, if we choose either because of greed or because of our own ignorance or switching off our brains to go and give our monies to people trading in metals, and at the end of the day you end up in a private problem, don't ask government to take a poor person's taxpayers' money to come and bail you out. You have a right to make bad decisions. I hope this will become the beginning of the end of all these kinds of schemes which we all end up lamenting about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Round of applause for him again, please, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. We all have a right to make bad decisions, but I just hope that in the end we'll make good decisions by the knowledge that we are receiving here. Don't switch your brain off or decide to go by greed. Our last speaker before we go to the next session, which is going to be more of an engagement with you, the audience, and many of you also watching and listening to us all across the various platforms we are on this morning. He is the president of the Association of Bankers and also the managing director of Stanbic Bank Ghana Limited. Ladies and gentlemen, please let's put our hands together from Hassan Antani. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And distinguished panelists, my boss, Mr. Saidu Mante, said, distinguished central bank governor and former chairman of my board. So I have to be very careful what I say. And my colleague, John Ewa, and other members on the panel, and of course, a very distinguished panel that you've listened to this morning. I think the conclusion is this should be the beginning of the end of these kind of schemes. And I just like to revert my mind very quickly to the old lady in the Volta region who, having lost her life savings, said she had lost trust in the banking system. And that's why she did what she did. And I just like to reiterate the importance of banks, and that banks have been at the center of the phenomenal growth the world has seen since the Renaissance, since companies and nations started to be formed. Banks have been at the center of that phenomenal growth. Banks have been at the center of the spread of global wealth. And we need to understand the concept of banking very carefully, and also to understand the consequences when banks fail. And I just like to reiterate 2 points. One was, I think, Ace said, please, if you're not a bank, avoid to use the name bank in whatever shape or form it is spelt. Because in Ghana, anybody going to give a deposit to anybody is called a bank. And they write and pronounce themselves in any shape or form that sounds like a bank, and the regulator says nothing. And probably this is where it should start. I'd also like to say that Regulation 8C thankfully does not apply to banks. and that we have another law which is stated out that allows banks to take deposits. And just so that we can understand probably why Bank of Ghana is not here. Bank of Ghana, from what is said, where a company in Regulation 8C is clearly told not to take deposits and is doing what it's not supposed to do legally, that is not what they're supposed to regulate. And therefore probably shouldn't be on the platform of Ponzi scheme discussions. But I'm here as president of the Association of Bankers. My colleague John Ewa is here from the UMB to say that the central bank is seriously engaged in correcting the ills of the banks that they have been set up to regulate and supervise and who have done wrong. And they're doing that now. But just so that we understand banking in a very simplistic manner, and I'll come to Ponzi schemes, is that 4 reasons why you go to a bank. Number 1, you go to the bank to put away your resources for safekeeping. We keep money there for safety so that, you know, you're not attacked by armed robbers or anybody who wants to appropriate what they have not earned. And typically, you hear of very little rates on the vaults of banks by any kind of, because that is probably the securest locations you can find in any country, including Ghana. There have been very few, or I don't remember any raid on the vault of a bank. So that's what we do. You bring your money and we keep it safely for you. Number 2, we give you what we call liquidity. When you bring the money, anytime you need it, and you come, we give it to you. That's liquidity. There are some other places where you can go and give the money to your uncle to keep, or some other person to keep, and when you come, they'll tell you, go and come. Because they've applied it to something else, and the money is not available for any immediate payout. It's important that you understand that when you put your money in a proper bank, properly run bank, and you come to take the money, you should get it. That's what we call liquidity. The third reason why you put the money in a bank is because you want some profit. So when you come and put money in a bank, the bank will typically, in the nature of our operations, transmute it into loans and other forms that other companies use, and they make profits. And after we've deducted our cost and other, shareholder interest, we will pay our depositors some interest. That's what we call. So you put your money in there for a return. And the other 4 very important reasons why banks generally exist is because we facilitate the payment system. So the payment system is not at your village level where you know who is producing yams and who is have salt and who has pepper, and you can exchange it, to get your economy going. No, we are now in a modern economy where the nature of your business is connected internally to several households and firms, and also externally to several companies. Banks facilitate the ability to move value across counterparties, which we do. Ponzi schemes don't do that. So all of what I've said is what banks do. Anybody else who doesn't do what we do, we're not banks. Fortunately now, ICT has enabled some other very slick companies to come to help us in the 4th leg, which is the payments solutions. I think the other thing that I'd like to say is that I have what we call the 5-minute rule in investing. And that if anybody explains any kind of investment to you in 5 minutes, if you don't understand it, take it from me, it's fraudulent. Any kind of investment, no matter how complicated, derivatives, whatever. If the person cannot, if you're not convinced in 5 minutes, and the person takes more than 5 minutes to convince you, it's fraudulent. Don't switch off your brain. Engage your brain. And I think, again, modern economy didn't start today. So, whether you are investing in metals, in commodities, telecoms, globally, there's a range of profitability any company or firm is expected to make. So, for example, if you wanted to take some shares or you wanted to invest in banks, if you go into the data, locally and globally, you know that banks on the average makes profits on their return, on what their activities, on an annual basis between 25 to 30%. So if you are going to invest in a bank and the bank says, I will pay you 70%, please think about that. If you are going to invest in a gold mining company, locally, internationally, the structure of production in gold and sales of gold have become settled. So globally, gold companies will make profits also between 25 to 30%. So if you're investing in a gold company or any structured deal that deals in gold, pay you over and above what these companies do, please don't switch off your brain. If it is telecoms, and you can go and review the literature, there's no telecom company anywhere that will make absurd profits. All of them, and for that matter, all industries, make profits within a certain reasonable range. So anything that is not within that reasonable range, please, A's definition is so apt. It's just fraud, milking, greed. So I think we have to, re-look at some of the concepts. And I think Ghana and my friend, Mr. Bentel, has made it, probably put it rightly. It's about the relationship between our governments and our populace generally. And in finance, we say caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware at all times. And this information is available to you. If you come to the bank again and you want to invest, you put your money and you say, oh, I can come back for it tomorrow. There's a certain return I'll give you. If you put money in a bank and say, I'll come back for it in 3 months, there's a return. And they look alike. They're not different. If you say, I'll come back for it in a year's time, there's another rate of return you get. So all of this is calibrated. And that's how economies move forward. So banks' out position is what we call the reasonable middle. We are the reasonable middle. We're not the ones that you come because of the nature of our business. Because we provide liquidity, we have to be the reasonable middle. We're the chameleon that sits in the middle of the economy, reflecting every activity. We reflect households and their aspirations. We reflect government and its aspirations. We reflect large corporate companies and their expectations. So we are the reasonable middle. And when banks fail, I heard systemic. What systemic means is that the failure of one is the failure of all, or the sickness of one is the sickness of all. So we are literally as strong as our weakest link. And when banks typically run into crisis, the latest 2009, is a proper global crisis. Because as I said, imagine the GDP of Ghana, currently sitting around $50 billion, were run as our mother in the Volta region because you didn't trust banks. Would we have an economy? No. Or the global economy run into several zillions of dollars. So banks are generally the reasonable middle. And when we fail, as we're going through right now, there is a real quiver in the country. The roots, the foundations of the global economy, your national economy, shakes. And that's when the regulator steps in. And I think we are the first, as the Association of Bankers, to, as it were, applaud, even with great difficulty, the work that the central bank is doing right now to recalibrate our system. And I think when the jury is out, when all of the investigations fall in, and I think the points made about, by A's about how we hold the law and consequence management, it's at the root of everything else that we do. But when the facts are out, you would understand what was banking and what was not banking. Because, as I said, we don't have a Regulation 8C. We have the banking law. That is also very, very prescriptive of what we can do and what we cannot do. And whether, for those of us in the difficulties or the industry as a whole, generally conformed or didn't. Again, the law is there, and one expects that as we move into the future, the results of whatever these comes up, and this is probably the most massive, Mr. Sedumante. I don't remember, bank failures on the scale that we have now. But the good thing is that the banks are strong. The banking sector in Ghana is absolutely strong. It's to say all of the issues in the industry doesn't impact 10% of our, and there hasn't been any real systemic impact. So that is to say, household deposits, company abilities to borrow, and the need for them to move funds between themselves, internally and externally, is still very safe and growing. And whatever we are going through can only make us better. And again, I just like to say something very quickly, which is what we call local banks and foreign banks. There's nothing called the Bank of Ghana, as far as Mr. Sedumante is saying. I mean, he's one of the discussants. You should apply that. Whether they license foreign banks is absolutely not acceptable. We should not accept that mediocrity is because we are local, and therefore it's permissible. And I don't like Sarbanes-Oxley Act and everything that was mentioned was because there were regulations that allowed certain levels of interpretation, which people interpreted to the edge and ran into trouble. What Sarbanes-Oxley and all other governance rules did was to tighten those things and to remove any ambiguity in interpretation. But enforcing the law and holding good corporate governance, holding owners, directors, executives, and staff accountable for their stewardship in any firm is the root of decent, modern economic growth. And we got as Ghanaians to learn that. And don't accept we are mediocre because we are local. Ghanaians rise to the highest. We recently laid to rest one of the best administrators in the world, our own Kofi Annan. Schooled completely in Ghana, always been a Ghanaian. And there are several distinguished Ghanaians doing global roles. Let's eliminate this concept of mediocrity just because we are Ghanaian. And also, the other thing is the concept of the big man. There are just too many big men in this country. Too many big men in the country. And again, if we don't deal with these things, Bernard Madoff was an absolute big man. All the global leaders sought the advice of Bernard Madoff. But when they found out that what he was doing was fraudulent, he was jailed over 100 years. So those of us who are given the privilege to be called big men can be of good character, because we are the foundation on which societies are built. So I think the subject of Ponzi is clear. Banks are not Ponzi because we are regulated to take deposits. We are the reasonable middle. Keep everybody happy and going. Thank you very much, TV3, for the opportunity.
Sal Hassan Andani. He's the president of the Association of Bankers here in Ghana, and he's a big man. Yeah, that one, I will add it. Andani, you don't want to be called a big man, but you're a big man. I want to be an MD of a Stanbic Bank Ghana Limited. You're a big man. But big man with principles. Yes. He's been a big man a long time ago. I accept that. But thank you so much, sir. We're going to go to the questions now, but let me just remind you that we're making this as all-inclusive as possible. So if you're watching us live on TV3, you're not left out. I'm going to put out a WhatsApp number you can send your questions to. Number is 054820 8123. That's 054-820-8123. We acknowledge that this is an all-important conversation, and not everybody could have made it here to the Executive Theater here at TV3. So it's going to be scrolling down on your screens. Just take a look at it, take the number, send your questions. We'll take as many as we can within the time as allocated to us. 0548-208-123. That's the number we're using. Also, on social media, the hashtag we're using for this conversation is hashtag MGDialogue. Hashtag MGDialogue on Twitter and Facebook. Continue the conversation as well on all those platforms. This is how the format is going to be. We have a few people who would give us some brief comments in contributing to the conversation. I'll take two at a time and then also continue with the questions. So the first two brief comments from some of our distinguished guests, and then we'll have questions from also our distinguished audience as well. First to do that, to give us just a brief comment in contributing to the conversation, Mr. John Ewa, is MD of UMB. Please put your hands together for him.
Okay, I've just been told I have a minute. Anyway, much has been said. So just to add to the brilliant discussions that we've had, the delivery that we've had in the last hour or so, it's focused a lot of attention on the Ponzi's themselves. But I think it takes two to tango. And we need to also look at why do people fall victim to the activities of these schemes. My personal view is, as investors, we have not taken the trouble to set a risk acceptance criteria for ourselves. What level of risk are we prepared to take in our drive to make money? It is as critical as the investment itself. There is a very beautiful correlation between risk and reward. It's a principle that has existed for centuries, and is one principle in finance that has stood still, and computers have not been able to erase the link between risk and return. So when you are being promised something you know you cannot get yourself, particularly those of us who can read and write, you know you cannot, with all the competencies and all the knowledge you have, you cannot engage in any activity that will give you that return. And as my senior brother said, if that person is taking more than 5 minutes or so to explain what it says that he is going to do that you cannot do yourself, and for which reason he is prepared to give you X times 100, you need to ask yourself and say, am I prepared for the potential risks associated with the kind of investment my money is going to be put to? It is a very fundamental and cardinal principle. Before you put your money in any venture, ask yourself. And sometimes, R5 happened, Piram happened. One thing is certain. As soon as these Ponzi's go under, you see a long queues forming in front of their facilities. Everybody seeking to get their pound of flesh as quickly as possible. You need to ask yourself, before investing in any venture, and this is not, because before you invest, nobody tells you it's a Ponzi. So I am saying you are going in with all the right intentions. So before you do go, just make sure that your financial planning is also intact. Most of these guys queue from 5 a.m. because some of them even sell household assets in a bid to optimize the aggressive returns that are promised them. Marriages are breaking down. People cannot pay school fees because even the emergency fund in the family to take care of these short-term potential liquidity breaks or gaps have been invested in a bit to make the most from the investment. I'm just giving a minute, but there's so much to discuss around this thing. But ask yourself, and viewers, ask yourself whether that which the person is going to do really is giving or can generate the kind of return is being promised. We've heard of rice, we've heard of metals. Everybody can go to the internet, type in Google, year-to-date price change in diamond, in gold. And you know the year-to-date how much movement the price of gold has or diamond has. It's a very simple test. So if somebody is investing your money in, year-to-date has yielded 10%, and the person is saying, I am going to give you 50%, where is that 40% going to come from? It's a very simple test. You don't need to be a graduate to be able to conduct this test. So thank you very much, but I'm here. If there is any question that is directly at me, I will also be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a proverbial 1 minute. You know, you can never speak in 1 minute. So you know, it was just to guide you. Thank you. Next up is Senor Jose. Please, let's put our hands together for him. He's one of the big men too here in this place. Senor, thank you.
This man is a big man. The reason why we cannot switch off our brains when we have to deal with we will definitely switch off our brains is because there's no brain. Greed erodes the brain. That's why you get the internet scams and all that. They tell you somebody, I have some billion somewhere, so you have to send some money for us to read, and you send them money. You are not thinking, do you know the person? You know, so the brain is not there. So there definitely is always standardly off. I think it's quite a very big problem. Our biggest problem is ourselves. We talk a lot about everybody, but forget that the regulators, the politicians, everybody, our brothers, our uncles, and our sisters. They emanate from within our own neighborhoods. They are our pastors, our brothers. You know it. So they are really a reflection of who we are. We blame everybody but ourselves. The problem we have in Ghana is the citizenry itself. If somebody is promising you 100% return, it's telling you that there's a 100% chance that you won't get your money back. You don't realize that. That's the risk-return relationship. It's the risk is a likelihood that that investment would go wrong. So if I'm telling you that in 1 year you get 120, it means that you have a 120% chance that your money will not come again. So if you are getting that, you are putting your money there, respectfully, you are on your own. But our governments and institutions owe us a duty of care. And that's where I actually have a problem. And I think that the Security and Exchange Commission, with all the efforts you're making now, still brings you back in the spotlight. And definitely also the Bank of Ghana. We use our taxpayers' money to pay them. He's sitting here, it's my taxes, my luxury tax this year. We'll pay his salary in some form. He knows I'm speaking indirectly. Why did it take them so long to take the steps that they took? Do we need to wait? First of all, why did you yourself even get involved as a Ghanaian? Then the next thing, why did it take so long? But the problem you have is that our entire system is so compromised, and it comes back to the big man syndrome. The Ponzis, every one of them, are well supported by all kinds of big men. If I use Richard Skies for a big man, yeah, I mean, that's a problem. You will not be able to hold some people because there are too many big men around the same people. But you go and try that Ponzi and let them catch you. You see, you go to your village, they'll bury you inside, and termites will eat you. So that is the problem. How do we get our institutions to really work? We need to depoliticize our institutions. We put so much power in political powers that have very short-term interest. How do we get institutions to really manage our public institutions? If SEC and its board, its CEO, the BOG, its board and its CEO was not a function of somebody's political lineage or sentiments at a given point in time, and it was a board that was made up of possibly the GBA, the Association of Bankers, the Ghana Bar Association, the engineers body. You have professional institutions, the GJA itself, I mean, because you want some public interest in there. You have professional institutions, the ICA. Okay? We identify these key professional institutions that mainly run the boss of these our regulators. Of course, the politicians will probably appoint one. The minority should appoint one. The majority should appoint one person. But they are there in the total minority. The governor of the Bank of Ghana is not appointed at the president's will. But for him to really get a job, that board will actually have to constitute a proper body to identify people and have a public hiring and interviewing mechanism. There's a transparent way of trying to appoint people into office. An objective way that when Mr. Andani sees that Kofi is appointed as his governor, he has a lot of respect for. Not by virtue of just the office, but he knows that that person earned the place on the basis of meritocracy. That guy goes there and will do his job. But when everybody is appointed by the politician calls you and gives you one call, the big man calls you, you think you take the action on the Ponzi when the big man himself has his money in the Ponzi. He hasn't collected his money finished. You want him to tell you to shut him down. We have a problem with our institutions. We need to depoliticize them so that they start working professionally. And those of you who sat there for these things to happen, you owed us a duty of care. How do we hold the officers in the regulatory institutions particularly responsible? If you yourself, you are going to jail for not doing your job, for we to, your duty, the duty you owe us as taxpayers, you fail to do your job, you go to jail. Tomorrow, when some big man calls you, you tell the person that I can go to jail. Oh, this one I cannot do. So till then, we'll have another part 2 of this session in another 5 or 10 years.
Is the CEO of Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors. Senor, thank you. We're going to go to the questions now, and we'll start off with those who are at home sending messages to our WhatsApp number. So my colleague Etonam say would read out
we
the
have
questions.
a lot of questions coming on social media. This one is from Paul Anani. He says, is Men's Gold operating a Ponzi scheme? The second question is, how many licensed investment firms do we in the country, and can we have their names? The third one says, if a savings and loans company regulated by Bank of Ghana takes deposits from customers but are not able to pay back the monies to their customers, what should the customers do? And then this one is asking, please, that's where the governor of the Bank of Ghana should resign. This one says, Securities and Exchange Commission, why did you have to wait this long to tell us about Men's Gold? So these are a few. We'll be bringing you more.
Thank you, Etonam say. So I'm sure those who just joined us might have to know that we're not doing this, or we didn't put this forum together with Men's Gold. But either way, we would answer the question without necessarily referring to Men's Gold. So there's no reference whatsoever to Men's Gold. So please bear that in mind. Any question specifically mentioning Men's Gold, we are not going to answer it because we have already received letters from their lawyers about this. So it's just for our viewers and our listeners to know. Thank you very much. So the questions, Etonam, I'm sure it was directed at all the speakers, so they would bear that in mind. Now we come to the audience. Just take 2 questions from the audience. What up? I see Dr. Lord Mensah of the University of Ghana Business School. Your hand is up. Lawyer Morris Ampao. Yes, so I'll take you and then the gentleman. Please mention your name and you. Okay, so is your microphone on?
Hello.
Please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Uriah.